So good evening. Welcome to the Operations Committee of the Portland Board of Public Education. It is Thursday, February 4th, and I'm just looking at the other members present. Our board member, Jeff Irish, and board member Yusuf, who are both Operations Committee members. Our chair is also present, and we have a guest, Carrie Gallivan. Welcome, Carrie. And Mr. Steve Stilfen, our Executive Director of Operations, and Superintendent Botana.
And I want to make sure that everybody knows that Mr. Gallivan is our interim Executive Director for Data and Technology, and so he's here.
Thank you. I didn't remember that. I wasn't trying to demote you before you began.
No problem.
He's phasing out now, so he's probably soon to be a guest, but for the time being, he is still, an integral part of the organization, and a very amazing addition that he's been. So,
awesome!
Thank you.
Welcome. So I am waiting for my other computer to come up because I don't have a dual screen here. So if we could come back to the meeting minutes in a second, and because I don't have the agenda right in front of me because of the computer issue here. So Javier, what's the first item up on the agenda?
So the first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes.
Okay, so let's skip over that for a second, and then when I bring that up, you want to start with the first item?
Sure. So we have a handful of updates that we wanted to do. First, at the last meeting, you recall that we talked a little bit about the solar installation that was planned for East Bend Community School. I know that Mr. Yusuf and Mr. Irish are new to the committee, so they weren't here at that time. But we included in here the overall update that if at that time you'll recall Derek Pierce and Siri Pierce actually talked about the fact that there was an update that the city had provided about the overall consortium project. So we got that and included it here because that was a request from the committee at that time. I've also sent that to the full board shortly after that meeting, so everybody should actually have seen that before. It's just an update on that. I also, if you recall, we talked about the backlog of capital improvement plan projects that we have somewhere in the neighborhood of $9 million of CIP projects that are, in the queue in some way, that have been approved and are in some way in the queue. And we need to pull together a plan for dealing with that backlog. Mr. Stilfen, Mr. Sherwood, and I have not had an opportunity to meet. Mr. Sherwood is, I believe, returning to work full time this week, and so we will find a time to do that and get ourselves organized to do that. That is one of the key goals this year for the committee that we will talk about when we get to the committee goal setting.
Javier, can I stop you for 1 second? I was talking to Yusuf the other day, and I haven't had an opportunity to talk to Jeff much about it. But the Sebago Technics report, at some point, I don't know what we have for a summary. I have the Bible out in my garage, which I can certainly let anybody borrow it if they'd like. It's about this thick of all the various things that over the years have been deemed things that we need to address. And most of the items that we're addressing now are safety, life safety items, etc., and stuff that we put off. But there's the list that you'll see is much smaller than the absolute Bible that we have of everything that needs to be done. So at some point, if either one of you want some light reading, I have it that you can certainly borrow it, but it might be good to have some sort of summary for them so they have that as well.
I mean, we don't have a summary. It is it is that document. It does have a summary included in it. There is a link that we can get you to the full report, so you don't have to necessarily walk around with
Thank you. Appreciate that.
full report. But it is, just in summary, it is an analysis of all of our facilities that was done back in 2017 by Sebago Technics under contract to the city. And, from that, they basically looked at every building, every system within our buildings, and assessed what over the next 20 years, what our expected facilities costs would be to keep all of those systems working effectively, and to replace things as they rolled, off. And so the total is, was $320 million at the time. Subsequently, we've done some of those things through our capital improvement plan, and the buildings for our future projects take about $40 million off of that number, just by virtue of the things that are included in the projects that we're doing. And the rest is what we use for our capital improvement plan submissions to the city. So if you when we get to that item, I'll show you an example of what that looks like in the CIP. And so, is that helpful, Sarah? Do I need
Yes, and I wasn't trying to jump ahead. I just I wanted to have them the context, and then also when we get to that point after the solar thing, if you basically can just abbreviated version of the revolving on the state level too, and what that involves. But we don't have to go into any great depth because I can help them both. Yeah,
and we can we can do a workshop on both of those issues at a subsequent meeting for the new board members, or we can facilitate setting up a conversation with Mr. Stilton and Mr. Sherwood, just so that you can dive into that at a deeper level and get a better understanding of those.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, so we the last item on the updates, and I actually think this should probably be a business item, and I did the agenda, but I'm second guessing myself right now, is this the calendar and start times. As you know, the calendar is up for board approval at the next meeting, but we never actually brought it through the committee, which is customarily what we do. So we have it here, and so if you want to take a look at it, I don't know. Do you now have access to board docs, Sarah? Does everybody? Do you have it? Or do you want me to put it up? Okay. So the calendar, as it,
if you could put it up, I see that we have 2 attendees, just in case, if that's possible. Is that easy to do? Okay, thank you.
So a little bit of background for the new members. Our calendar is, this is our usual timeline for putting out a calendar for the following school year. By state law, we have to have 175 days of student attendance on the calendar. As a district, we actually have 176. That's down from 178 a couple of years ago when it was originally reduced for budget purposes and subsequently altered to have those days be additional teacher professional development days. So that we now have 176 student attendance days. We still have 183 contract days for our teachers. This is the calendar for next year. It's similar to what it has been in the past. We're starting a little bit earlier this year. Last year, obviously with COVID, we started even later, but we were projected to start after Labor Day, but Labor Day was earlier in the year last year. And so that's why we started after, we were planning to start after Labor Day. Anyway, so that's the beginning of the year. right now has students coming back on August 31st. Staff comes back the week before that for the 4 days of planning and preparation. The next sort of salient change is after Veterans Day on November 12th. That is a no student, no teacher day. One of the things that we're required to do with our calendar is to have it be no more than 5 days difference with other school districts in our region, because they all send students to our Career and Technical Education Center. And because of that, we have to have our calendars be substantively the same. And so this is a day that all of the other districts were intending to take. So we decided to take it as well to reduce the number of different days. We actually think that it probably will help attendance on that day, because, having a Thursday holiday followed by a day back on the 12th. So we think it will probably help attendance. So that's a change. And then we don't have any other substantive changes. So we still have our standard winter break, and we have our standard February break. April break is a little bit different. We have traditionally taken the day before the actual break, which coincides with the Good Friday holiday. We are not taking Good Friday this coming year. And that was, again, we were the only other district that did it was Cape Elizabeth. So we're discontinuing it to reduce the number of dissimilar days. We also have had a significant number of folks ask us to if we were going to do that, to also take Eid. Eid is a difficult holiday to take, because it is often, it's not clear exactly what day is going to be Eid, because it's tied to the moon, and depending on local imams and the local conditions, it could be on any one of 2 days. And so it's often difficult to actually predict it. And so we consulted with local Muslim leaders, and they agreed that it would be fine not to have that as a holiday. We do have a religious holidays calendar that we put out at the same time. And our policy is that if a student is not in school because of their religious convictions, that, those are days that we discourage people from having major activities, field trips, things along those lines, and giving students the ability to make up the day. And that's true for, the Jewish holidays, which happen in September and October, as well as it will be for Good Friday or for Eid. So those are the major features in the calendar. What I really wanted, and the reason that I think it should be a business item, is I do want your thoughts on the willingness of the board to engage in a conversation about the changing start times going forward. The sort of the essence of this issue is, the science around, adolescent brains and, the day rhythms of adolescence suggests that they do, much better when school starts later, that their, bodies just, function better that way. For those of us who have adolescents, know that to be, generally our lived experience. And so this is something that it's on our to-do list. It's been on our to-do list for a number of years. We think that we have an opportunity now, because This year, we actually have moved our calendar to where the middle school and high school secondary students begin the day later. And so, this is always a controversial issue. So there is, I am entering this, conscious of the fact that it will take a significant amount of work for staff and, significant amount of time for the board to actually engage in the community outreach and discussion around this issue. But if we are ever going to do it, this would be a time where, there's already a precedent that has been set this year that I think makes it, there's a door that's cracked and an opportunity to go through that door. So I really wanted to open it up and get advice from the committee to understand your willingness to engage on that. We as a staff are prepared to do it. We know that it would be a significant amount of work, but I don't want to begin this work without having first consulted with you about your willingness and readiness to tackle that.
So just a little bit of context too for all of those that are here, they're new, as well as the attendees. So about 5 years ago, the board took on this particular subject. We could have done a lot better job than we did with the rollout. It became, as Javier said, very controversial. We had a lot of great scientific, so it's not anything new to us, nor is it new to science that starting earlier for elementary school and starting later for high school, it's not a new revelation. Issues that we had at the time, just so you're aware, and I have all of the information from prior, was the largest issue were families' feedback, as well as transportation. So I appreciate Javier mentioning the engagement that we would need to have, because it was a very robust conversation that we had with the community about this, as well as our transportation department to make it all work. As you can imagine, too, there were several issues sports-wise and so on and so forth that came up. So we have a lot of data, and I don't know, Javier, what you have from previous, so we don't reinvent the wheel of all of the data that we pulled. Granted, it's updated since 5 years ago, but there were a lot of things. It
was longer than 5 years ago because I was here 5 years ago. So.
You were here 5 years ago? Wow. So maybe 6 years. It was the last year where Superintendent Kalk was with us, and it was kind of his sending off.
7 years ago.
Okay. Wow. Good Lord. Time flies. So with that, I wanted to open it up to Jeff and Yusuf as committee members and see what questions you may have or what thoughts you may have at this time.
Sure. And thank you, Javier, for bringing this to our attention. I'm sure I'll have more questions as I kind of analyze some of this. I've read through the minutes, so I'm briefly familiar, but what was the ultimate factor that kind of quashed that pursuit however many years, 5, 6 years ago? Was it just a community that wasn't prepared for that change?
I wasn't here, and there's nobody on our senior staff that was around for that conversation. So I think
I have all that data, Jeff, that I can share with all of you. But
do you have recollection of what?
Yeah. So the brief was again around family issues for before and after care, siblings, some of the high schoolers with jobs. And also having to be home to take care of their siblings. Sports was an issue because we would be completely off from others. So that became an issue. Transportation was a large issue. So again, I have all of that information in a bag somewhere, but I'm happy to, I've gathered it all together. And there were several reasons, but to Javier's point, there's probably a lot of reasons now that we've been able to overcome some of those obstacles that we had in the past. And the research does still stand for the reasoning why we wanted to attempt it at that time. We just couldn't coalesce around it and make everything come together and work well. So it kind of fell apart in the community.
And when you say it fell apart in the community, does that mean that you had, significant opposition?
Pushback? Yes. We had a larger pushback than those that wanted to support it because of those reasons. And again, since there is no senior staff that was here at the time, I'm happy to pull all of that information. It did become, it engulfed the board. It's a huge undertaking, and it's not to say we shouldn't do it. But it is a very large undertaking of staff as well as the board and engagement with the community. But certainly it's a very important topic. So,
Sarah,
can we hold on 1 second? I just want to go to the committee members first, please. Okay. Jeff, did that answer your question?
It did, yeah. I would be interested to find out what the old data was that ultimately kind of quashed that pursuit and what we've done or what's in place. And I know that measures have been put in place, pre-K and transportation issues, but I would be interested to see how it was quashed and what we've done since then that would make it a viable pursuit for the community.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Yusuf, did you have any questions at this time?
No, I'm still learning a lot of information.
Okay. I'm going to go to Chair Figdor.
Thank you. One thing I remember at the time is I don't believe that the science behind the functioning of the adolescent health needs and was front and center in the debate. So it was less, as I remember it, was less clear from the community why to undertake such a big change. And the science behind it wasn't a clear driver. But again, I was just a community member and parent at the time. So that's just my own personal reflection. And then I think Jeff, to your questions, I think, and I know that Liz Blackwell-Moore is on and perhaps might be able to provide additional context, but I know in the years since the board last considered this, there's been districts all across Maine that have made these changes to their schedules to address the realities that adolescents shouldn't be up first thing in the morning and at school. And, and just to get at what my understanding the science says is that it's actually that adolescents shouldn't be in school before 10 a.m. Ideally, shouldn't be in school before 10 a.m. in terms of, how their bodies are working. But that's the American Academy of Pediatrics, but it says, realizing that 10 a.m. is not a realistic time for most districts. They're saying the earliest that adolescents should be in school is 8:30. So I think a couple of things that have changed in the ensuing time are that other districts across the state are moving to adjust their schedules to the science. Certainly changes that we've already talked about in terms of our own operations. And then I think, continued development in terms of the strength of the science.
Thanks, Emily. And I do want to add to that, since I was on the board at the time, is we did have some parents that were pediatricians that were strong advocates for it. We also did have American Pediatrics report, as well as numerous other reports. There was a lot of science behind it and a lot of conversation around that because, again, there's a lot of people that really, believe, as the science states, of the start times. Again, it's been updated, to Emily's point, as well since that, but we do have a lot of data. Pat, our doctor from Maine Med, I can't remember Pat's last name at the moment.
Patterson.
What's that?
Dr. Patterson.
Patterson, thank you very much. She also testified, as well as people from the university and from other places. So again, I know it's not helpful at the moment, but I can pull all of that because I have all that information. Jeff, you have a question?
Just a statement. I'm not discounting the science. I certainly rely on the professionals for that. I have 2 kids, so I certainly understand the idea of getting them up and into school at an early hour is probably less than favorable. aside from an educational perspective. So I wouldn't be opposed to it. I just, for those who didn't oppose the science from an operational perspective, whether it's transportation and I could see as a parent, as a later school time when when an adult has to report to work at 8:30, 9 o'clock, that deviation, I assume, was a large consideration with respect to the community. So how that would be addressed, I won't go into much more than that, and I welcome a conversation with Sarah with respect to historical data and how we stand now with respect to that. So thank you. Thank you, Emily, for your insight.
And just to note that some of our elementary schools start that late. So like at Reiki, my daughter starts school at 8:50. And that's not, I mean, it's this year during COVID, but it's not, it's substantially similar to the usual start time for Reiki. So we do have school starting that late now.
So Javier, do you have that you can outline for, maybe we can get it to the operations committee, of what your thoughts are time-wise, of how long, what the staff involvement would be, and so we can set up some sort of timeline to be able to look at making the change?
I mean, if you're asking us to pursue this, then we will. We don't have a timeline at this point for doing that. Obviously it would need to happen prior to September of next year if we were going to do that. So we can work backwards from that. We have, we've looked at this. We've looked at not only the research, but also the process that other districts that have, that have engaged in these conversations, the processes that they've followed, the surveys that they've done, the types of community conversations that they've had about it. And so I think we understand what it looks like to do it. It is a significant undertaking for us as a staff. And so, if we do that, there are some other things that we're not going to be able to do. So I think that's why I wanted to put that on your agenda, because I don't want to make that investment if the board is not interested in doing it. And then if that's the case, when we come back with a plan, we will also come back with, what are the trade-offs? What are the things that we will not be able to follow through on if we are pursuing that. I do want to just say, to, I think, Ms. Figdor's point, this year we changed our schedules where we have, a 7:30 start for students at several of our elementary schools. That's going great. And we have a late start at our middle schools and high schools. I think different since the last time that you did this, all of our high school students are now on Metro. So not all of them, but the overwhelming majority of them are on Metro. And so as a result, one of the major transportation challenges, which was the sort of the multiple, the bandwidth necessary to do that, has been lessened. So there's still some special ed transportation to high schools, but for the most part, high school students are on Metro. So that's different. We've talked with transportation about what the schedule would look like, and it would be, roughly we would stay with what we currently have, which is three different sort of rotations for our transportation. One at 7:30, one at 8:15, and the high school middle school one would be at 9. So that's what we would be talking about for start times. So that's, and it's similar to what we're doing now. We would just, in essence, flip the middle schools, which are now at 7:45, to the later time slot. So we think that it's manageable from a transportation perspective. There are pros and cons from, family life perspective to doing this. There are issues around athletics, as Chair Thompson mentioned, that have not changed. I mean, that's still the majority of activity happens, right after school. And in our case, it would mean, and we've already started this conversation with high school principals about what the last period of the day might look like and things along those lines to enable students to be able to leave for sports. We have, we still have paths, for example, that would have to stay on an earlier schedule. So most of our students go to paths in the afternoon. So it's not that significant an issue, but we would need to run paths on its current schedule so as to not disturb the neighboring districts that send students there. So I think we've solved some of the logistical issues, and it really just comes down to, will the community be in support, and will the board, have the information that it needs to make a decision that is based on, the science and, a level of comfort that we are able to manage the logistics associated with it.
So people know as well, the impetus of us going to Metro happened at the same time. So we were discussing getting rid of yellow buses for high schoolers and moving to Metro while we were having the same conversation. So the one thing that did come out of the start and end times was us switching over to Metro for our high school transportation. So all of that was happening at the same time. And that was one thing we were able to progress with, was the high school, and that was no small feat either, to bring parents along, and we went through some growth issues with that. But I think, since then, to Javier's point, it's been running a lot smoother. It's been years now since we've been doing that, but that was one of the good things that did happen out of that conversation. So that was at the same exact time. So as you can imagine, lots of changes at once kind of made people a little freaked out. Okay. Any questions, Yusuf or Jeff, at this time? Yusuf?
I'm more than happy to participate this work, but I want to learn more about the effect of on the students, those who work part-time maybe, and the families, and how family feedback. And I think, in a way, this is the best time to change something, because we already have changed a lot of things because of COVID. And in the same time, as you said, Ms. Thompson, families are going through a lot of change, and that might kick back some of the ideas that we want to change. So I'm about to learn more about the issue. Thank you.
So what I hear you saying is go ahead and develop a plan to proceed with this work.
Yes.
Sorry. I think that and I don't know, of course, the board has completely turned over. I'm probably the last man standing there at this point. So, I'm very interested.
Laura was probably there as well at the time.
I'm trying to think if she was. I think that might have been right when she was coming. I don't know. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But I am very interested in it. I was interested in it back then. But I think that for me personally is the community engagement first and foremost, and having the board have a well-rounded look at it. I'm also concerned, though, at the same time, of weighing staff time. So why I asked you about a plan was I don't think I'm asking for a plan detailed, but to your point, what would be the trade-offs? So I guess that's kind of would go into my thinking of whether we even dive deep into it. I think eventually it will come, but for my own thoughts is I would be able to first see what you have for your staff as workload, and to Yusuf's point, everything going on, a lot of change going on. So sometimes change, while change is happening, is good, and sometimes, as we all know, change is not good. So I guess I just need to have more of a framework from you, Javier, as to what the capacity is for staff and how long you think you could ideally pull this off. I know that you're saying September would be, but again, I don't know. I have to look at the time frame and the timeline that we did last time, but it was not, we weren't able to swiftly move to get it to that next calendar. So we were hoping the following calendar, but as I said, it didn't progress. So I mean, I'm very in favor of taking a look at it, but at the same time, I think we need to just be able to look at what the trade-offs are that we won't be able to have staff do, and I guess the return on the investment, the benefits of what you can't do because of, would be my thoughts. Jeff or Yusuf, do you have any thoughts on that? Jeff?
Nothing other than what you just said. I think we would need a preliminary framework on how it looks going forward before we utilize our time going through the process.
So I hear, sort of a desire for some form of a memo that summarizes the science behind it, and maybe looks at what was done before, how other districts have gone about doing it, and then what the implications would be for us to do that at this time, with maybe a general timeline of what those processes would look like. I mean, this is, it would be time use for the board, because you would need to have a number of workshops and hearings and things along those lines. It would be a significant challenge, or sort of take significant bandwidth from our communications and public engagement. So from Grace and her team, because there would be surveys and organizing facilitated and interpreted community meetings and things along those lines, to be able to have all voices heard that would be involved. So I think that's where the engagement is. There'd be some, there's additional work that we would need to do with the city around what are the implications for facilities use, what are the implications for rec programming, in order to, sort of accommodate basically the longer time that students would be on the back end, but, less time on the front end, needing, families would need care for their students. So those are the kinds of things that we've already started to talk about, and that we would, I can put that into a memo and then, share that with the whole board, and, maybe, we can have a conversation at the next operations committee meeting about whether we should move forward after you have a chance to look at that memo.
And Javier, when you look at it, can you look at it from the standpoint of two, if one is September, obviously, but then also if we did it over the course of maybe with the next calendar. So if we had that time frame, how we could stretch it out a little bit more and have all of that work take place during that time period, what would it look like? Because I would think it would look a lot different than if we were shooting for this calendar versus a year from now, but we make a commitment to doing it. So I think workload wise and board, et cetera, would look a lot different if we look at the timeline a little bit wider, maybe. Just my thoughts.
We can do both.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yusuf, do you have anything at this time?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Javier.
Could I have my hand up? Could I just say one thing that I don't believe we've talked about, but just so that Yusuf and Jeff know that this issue has been on our operations committee agenda for a solid 2 years. So it's not like we haven't been doing this work. For a good stint, it was on our agenda every week, every month. And a lot of work was done to look at, especially from the transportation side, to look at how we could operationalize this. So it is not new to the operations committee in the recent past. I just don't know if that was said. And then I just want to agree with Yusuf that I think now is the time to do it, going into next school year, as we've thrown the pandemic has thrown families into disarray. When we come back and restart school, we restart it in this new way that is is responding to the science, the latest science. And I just wanted to also raise the fact that in our equity work, I think we need to consider the newer research, which Liz alluded to in her comment, that talks about how disadvantaged students are the research suggests stand to gain the most from this for adolescents for having later start times. So just wanted to add that the equity perspective as well.
Great, thank you, Chair. Okay, all right.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Nope, I said thank you. You want to go on to the next item?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So the next item is really just going back to the committee annual report and goal setting. And because we canceled the last meeting, I just wanted to make sure that we took a minute here to make sure that we are in agreement around the goals for the committee for this coming year. So and I will share a screen again so that you can see that. So those are the goals, reviewing and approving the plans for the backlog CIP projects. So that, as I mentioned at the beginning, is something that we have not started yet to organize for, but it's a key aspect of what the committee committed to doing. Tracking the completion of our revolving loan fund ADA projects. That's sort of a short-term thing because those all are, sort of starting now and have to be completed by, sometime towards the end of this year. And reviewing and approving the pre-K transportation plans. I think that is primarily a budget item that is not really the committee alone to do, but as part of looking ahead at what are the things that we are putting in place that have cost implications. We had the workshop yesterday, Tuesday, on pre-K expansion, and during that we talked about the fact that there will be some transportation costs associated with that. So we will be bringing those to you in March for you to understand what it is that we're proposing to do and what the costs associated with that are. And then, this item that we just talked about, the approval of the school year 21-22 calendar and, potentially approval of proposed start and end times that are different from the ones that we currently have. So we're bringing the calendar to the board without the start times. Those are, that's not required for purposes of the approval of the calendar to have the start times squared away. So we wanted to get that on the book so that people will know when school starts, when school ends, so that they can plan their life for next year, but also, recognize that the start times could be different. So I guess my question is, are these fine? This is what we're moving forward with. Are there any other things that the committee would want to prioritize as we start this new year?
Javier, can I ask you, can you just blow that up a little bit?
Probably.
I've read it, but I just want to. Thank you. Thank you. And I know that you, Jeff and Yusuf, have seen this as well already, and everyone thought that looked pretty good. I don't know if Jeff and Yusuf, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, if you're familiar with the revolving loan is, and maybe if Javier, if you could just do a quick synopsis of that, just so they're aware of what that is.
Yeah, and actually, because I talk too much and I don't know what I'm talking about, I'm going to actually let somebody who does. So, Mr. Sherwood, would you want to tell us a little bit more about the revolving loan fund?
I will pass this to Mr. Sherwood because he has 17 years of dealing with the state revolving renovation fund, which we're in full swing with right now with Simon's architectural firm, and just had a nice long meeting the other day on the progress that they're making. So, Doug, you can please fill in the blanks here on the history of the SRRF in the Portland Public Schools.
All right, we have I've been with the Portland Public Schools. Good evening, everyone. Sorry, Mr. Irish and Youssef. My name is Douglas Sherwood. I'm the facilities coordinator for the Portland Public Schools. I've been with the district for just over 20 years now. This is probably our sixth state revolving renovation fund that I've been involved with, and certainly by far our largest and most challenging, as we're trying to get work done at least 8 different buildings before the work is done. But the process is somewhat long and engaging and has set requirements, as the superintendent has set out. We do need to start and finish by certain dates. They are sometimes flexible, but you can't always guarantee that things are going to be flexible. I think we'll see a little bit more relaxed approach based on COVID-19 and the nature of the construction market, but it is a very set in stone program. Each time they open the door, I would say the better part of 50, 60 districts apply. You're lucky to get, a little stock of the 20 to 25 million they set aside. And when you look at ours being a project that's in excess of 1.5 million when we add our local funding to it, it was a fairly big chunk this time around. So we're fortunate to be in the position we are today to make significant improvements that we will need to make and should continue to make going forward. Again, a reflection back to the facilities assessment the superintendent discussed from 2017 that identified somewhere on the order of $5 million worth of American with Disabilities Act requirements that we needed to address. So we tried to hit the highlights here. The biggest project is a project that we also had gotten funded in a prior, and that's Lincoln Middle School access and entrance. To be accessible, and how we might go about that, as Mr. Stolfen just said, we're still discussing with our architects.
To Sherwood, that was wonderful. I'm sure you could have talked all day about that. It was good synopsis. Thank you very much. Any questions, Jeff or Youssef, from that? Okay. Any change or addition?
Thank you.
Looks good to me too. Youssef, is look okay to you? You have to unmute yourself, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Okay.
For the third point, the pre-K transportation plans, does that include buying new buses or?
It does not. The fleet that we have, which we've bolstered in the last couple of years, including purchasing additional buses this year with our CRF funding. We are fine on the equipment side, but we do, it does require additional staff. So, when we talk about it at the next meeting and we lay out what the schedule would look like and all of that, we'll get into the staffing associated with it, but there is no additional buses that are required to do that.
Thank you. Superintendent, I was wondering too, we have a Mr. Dunn and Ms. Ullman present as well as Mr. Gallivan. I didn't know if there was they were just listening in or if there was a part that you wanted them to play.
They will be joining us for the IT department analysis, which is
Okay. Okay. Great, thank you.
Yep. So if we're ready to move on then, the last item before we get to what will be the largest item on the agenda, which is the IT department analysis, is the proposed revised capital improvement plan proposal. So just for background, again, because of the change in the committee, Mr. Youssef and Mr. Irish, you don't have specific recollection of this, but we brought a proposal to the committee back in November that really sort of based on the fact that we have a very large number of CIP projects that are backlogged, was sort of almost non-existent. We were basically proposing not to have a CIP proposal. We had a robust discussion about that with the committee, and they asked us to go back and to look at our what we would have normally asked for, and sort of narrow that down to projects that were associated with life safety issues and could be combined with other projects that are currently in CIP that are part of the backlog that we are in the process of organizing to have engineering done and then be able to leverage those projects. And so that's what we did, and that's what we are bringing to you today. Before I do that, though, I want to just sort of going back to the question earlier about the Sebago Technics report and how we use that report. I'm not going to go into the current proposal yet, and instead I'm going to focus. Can you still see this? Yeah, I can blow it up. So this is what was on our original list that we said we would not do any of this coming year, that we would just not have a request so that we could focus on the backlog. And here you can see some of these areas, and I'm going to ask Doug or Steve probably Doug, to walk through exactly what these are, because these are directly tied to the Sebago Technics report. So it tells you different things about when those projects should happen, what the reason is. And so just as a bit of an introduction to the Sebago Technics report, Doug, could you just walk not through the specific projects, but here at the header level, could you just talk through what FA year, the condition level, life cycle, and action priority are? Did we lose Doug?
I don't think so. I think there he is.
Here we go.
There he is.
Coming back.
Okay. Sorry.
Yes, good evening again. The report had many different facets, and given its volume and distinction, had to find some way to kind of break things into practical sections that you can review and work with. So the title just after the year 2022 is FA, means Facilities Assessment. The number or year that you see there, 16 to 20, would have been 16 to 20 years from when the assessment was done, which was 2017. But at the same time, when it says that, they broke off everything that was in kind of an exterior view of the building or anything having to do with the nature of the exterior of the building into the later phases, because it typically doesn't have as urgent a requirement. But if there was a truly urgent requirement that needed to happen before that 16 to 20 years, they may have put it in the 0 or 1 to 5 that you see halfway down the chart, which means you're supposed to be doing it within the next 5 years. So in the case of during high school, and it's replaced boiler feed tank pumps and controls, 2017, 2022, that's 5 years. So that's why that particular project is listed in the particular item here. The next column, condition level, is just telling us roughly, do we need to, or how soon do we need to address the different issues? 0 means it's really past its useful life, and we need to get it addressed right away. And if you look at the column to the right, which is life cycle, OBS stands for obsolete. So anything with a 0, 1, or even to a certain extent a 2 should be addressed as immediately as possible within the year group identified. Life cycle, again, most of what you see is either obsolete, end of useful life, or approaching end of useful life. There are other categories, fair and reasonable, and you might just be looking at it closely, might just need to do maintenance on the work. And then the last action column is a priority. It says S means short term. We need to address it right away. L might be a little bit longer term. But at the same time, if you look back across, replacing boilers at Lincoln, if the equipment's about to fail, it needs to be done. It's in the 6 to 10, and we're already at year 5. So we need to start looking at those things that are in 6 to 10 and addressing them now.
And so, the main purpose of sort of walking through this is what our original list was, that we then, because of the backed up projects, decided that we were not going to pursue. The committee asked us to actually go ahead and try to come up with what are the things that we actually could do in this coming year. And so that's what we are proposing today, and that this is what we have discussed with the city as our potential CIP for this coming year. And you can see that we're prioritizing the items that are life safety things like the sprinkler system, and can be tied into existing projects that we're undertaking, like the door access controls. This finalizes several years of door access improvements that we're making across the district, as well as the fire alarms at peaks. We have several fire alarms in the backlog, so this would just get lumped into that particular project and to that particular contract. So those are the facilities-based requests. And then we do have, we're resuming our normal transportation. This is a renewal of buses, so buses that are going, that are nearing the end of their life, and there is a 10 to 15 year, depending on what type of bus it is. So this would be just to replace buses that are reaching that end of life. And so this is the CIP proposal that we would like to bring to the board for submission to the city this year.
Excuse me, Javier, what our discussion on the dairy entry?
I don't have all the details of that, so we need to talk through that and figure out if that was what Mr. Stilton is talking about. Is we found, we had this conversation on Wednesday or Tuesday about the masonry at Deering High School is in a bad condition, and so it needs to be repaired. And we were considering adding this to CIP instead of trying to patch it together over 2 budget years.
And Javier, before we move on to questions, can you talk a little bit about your first presentation with the city manager and from what I'm remembering, it seemed so long ago, that how they were balancing things and they actually wanted the school department to come forward, and then can you talk a little bit about that? I'm trying to remember the whole conversation.
Yeah, that's not correct. I think that okay. there is a very small. The city is planning on a very small CIP, so I think they actually approached us on the fact that we have $9 million worth of backlogged CIP projects, and urged us to try to prioritize getting those done, given that we had that the city overall is only envisioning a $10 to $12 million CIP. And so that was what sort of motivated us to come forward with that original 0. But then after the discussion with the committee, we tried to figure out what are the things that are, sort of naturally, would naturally fit into the projects that we are backlogged and trying to get caught up on. And so that's how we came up with these.
Thank you for clarifying. I know there was a conversation with the city, and so thank you very much. Jeff or Yusuf? Do you have any questions in regards to the proposed CIP at this time?
No, not. I mean, that's a lot. I mean, I did have the opportunity to review this earlier, and I'm still trying to digest some of it. So you'll forgive me if I'm absent questions now, but I may have some in the near future.
Great,
But thank you for the presentation.
Yusuf?
Yeah, same thing. I will reach you out if I have any question. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would say, Superintendent, that I'm in full support of this. I think that our list grows bigger and bigger and bigger. And to your point of the 300 million that we have, this is a small, tiny little dent, but we also want to be considerate of the city's capacity as well. I think this is a fair ask. So I would be in favor of this. Are you feeling comfortable with that as well, Javier, to put this forward?
I am. I still need to talk to Steve about the possibility of putting the Deering project, which is in the neighborhood of $200,000, adding that to the list. But we've vetted this particular list already with the city, so it would require additional conversation with the city at that, if we were going to add that. So that's on our to-do list. And when we bring this to the board, which we're envisioning a first read of this at the February 23rd meeting, I just wanted to make sure that the operations committee knew what we were thinking, how our thinking has evolved since we first brought this to the table. And, so that's where we are.
So once you go back to the city and talk to them about the additional costs with Deering, do you feel the need to bring it back to us, or do you just want kind of an indication from us that we're fine? Okay, because I would be fine with that as well. If the city's fine, you're comfortable with it, I'm fine with moving that forward as well.
Yeah.
I just have one question, and I'll default to the past experience on this. And I was just trying to do a side-by-side analysis of what's on the backlog as to what's proposed. If we add the Deering project, do we stand to lose something that's on the proposed 2020 CIP? No. No,
it wouldn't. We wouldn't lose. I mean, so this is our ask, right? So at the end, it has to be approved by the city. So we could lose all, or none. But it would not impact any of the projects that are backlogged. The only impact would be on our staff capacity to get the projects, ready for execution, which is where we've struggled and why we have, a significant backlog of projects, and that's why it's on the agenda as a primary focus of this committee. So adding that would not would not be like we're going to take these other projects off and put that one on there.
It would just go back on the backlog. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
And that one is urgent. We have to do it whether it's out of CIP or whether it's out of our regular budget, because there are chunks of masonry that are falling from the front of the building, and that's obviously not okay. Wouldn't you say so, Mr. Stilfen?
I would absolutely agree, Mr. Botana. And just a sidebar to what the superintendent is speaking about, as we look at these backlog projects, there may be better compatibility in consolidating life safety issues. Like we looked at the sprinkler system at Peaks, but there's also a line that had renovations, as Doug and I was talking about here in the last few days, that there's a natural fit for project progression in getting them scheduled, engineered, and done in a wider package rather than how they were assigned in CIP to be that far in the backlog. So just making a common approach to the areas of concern, whether they're roofing, whether they're HVAC, whether they're windows, that we're reaching in a broader reach and pulling in all of the schools, although they look the same and designated on the line. But when you bring this to operation and putting boots to the ground and putting contractors in place and doing primarily all this work in the summertime, we need to be really partnering up on in the areas of where we can broaden the reach to all these projects to get them completed and never carry a backlog of that amount of money.
Okay, thanks, Steve. So we'll move on then to the last item on our agenda today, which is to review the, an analysis that was done of our IT department, our technology department. So a little bit of background, and then I'm going to turn it over to the folks that are the experts on this. So that would be Carrie Gallivan, who has been leading the department since October, and then we have with us Nona Ullman and Phil Dunn. We entered into this project because we have a relationship with the Bar Foundation. They've been helping us to do a number of things around, high school transformation work. And this past summer, when the pandemic hit, they really have been an incredibly responsive partner and said, obviously we understand that the things that you were trying to do are not the things that you can do in the current context. So are there other areas where we could support you? And they gave a grant to an organization called Catalyst Ed, and Catalyst, and they said, to all of their other grantees like us, if you have specific projects that you would like to tackle that are, related to the work that you're trying to do, and you could use some consulting support for doing that, Catalyst Ed can help you to do that. And so we approached Catalyst with a set of 3 projects, and one of them was this one, which is basically posed a question, given the pandemic, the demands that we've placed on our IT department have increased exponentially. We have asked them to do more with the same resources than ever, and what are other people doing? What are other school districts doing in order to be able to respond to that? And what is the sort of the standard organization and support structure that are that great IT departments have in order to be able to meet their needs? And so that's how we wound up working with Improve K-12. With Nona Ullman, who is the president of Improve K-12, and with her associate Phil Dunn, who what we asked them to do is to basically look at our current structure and look at that against the sort of best in class districts that are like us in terms of size and scale, and help us to think through what would our organizational needs be to be able to be at that level. And so that's the work that they've done. And tonight they're going to share an abbreviated version of the full report that they delivered to us a couple weeks ago. So I'm going to turn it over to Carrie for any additional introductions, and then let them take it away. And Carrie, are you presenting? Should I make you co-host, or do you want me to do it? How do you want?
Let's see. Nona, do you actually want to drive the show? Would that be best?
Sure.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'll set things up. So thank you, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm just going to give a little bit more context of really kind of what the work really was done for this. Nona and Phil has just been tremendous. They have interviewed each one of the IT team members. So they spent a lot of time talking one-on-one with them, reviewing all of the job descriptions as well, and then also digging into the details around the technical architecture, the infrastructure of the system, systems that Portland has, as well as digging into a lot of the data around the number of devices, the types of devices which are being managed. And so It really was an extensive deep dive into it. And so there was a lot of back and forth and pulling together. So while it's a very condensed report, I just wanted to emphasize there was a lot of work put into really kind of pulling it together. And that doesn't even begin to really address some of the work that they did in reaching out to other school districts. And so really not just here in Maine, we've got one benchmark with a school district, Lewiston School District, but also really reaching out across the country to parallel and similar types of school districts and interviewing and talking to folks in there. So it really is an excellent representation and a lot of work going into it. So I'm going to just facilitate, let's see.
I think, Nona, yeah.
There we go. Perfect.
Present.
And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Nona.
Great. Thank you so much. My name is Nona Ullman, and thank you so much for that lovely introduction. It's been a pleasure working with Portland Public Schools. We are so excited to share with you our work. Just a little bit of background. I've been working in education for 30 years, primarily in a management consulting role, working with over 50 educational agencies in 20 different states. About 8 years ago, Phil and I started working together at Greenwich Public Schools, and that was a 5-year project to implement a one-to-one environment for a 9,000 student district in Connecticut. And we worked side by side for 5 years doing that. So when we come in, I bring both perspectives of a national perspective of other institutions at the system level, but also one of actually implementing a one-to-one environment. So I think it's kind of a unique perspective. And I'll let Phil introduce himself. When he was the CIO and I worked for him as the project manager, and an incredibly smart and wonderful and dedicated human being. So Phil, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself as well briefly.
Hi, good evening, everyone in Portland. And my name is Phil Dunn. I am a longtime educational practitioner. I've done a number of things in K-12, most notably a math teacher in my old South Bronx neighborhood I'm very, very proud of. But for the last over 10 years, I've been a chief information officer or head technology executive of K-12 school districts. I'm currently the CIO of Broward County, Florida Public Schools, which is the nation's 6th largest public school district. So I try to bring the lens of an active practitioner in these engagements, and I very much have my pulse on what's going on throughout the nation due to the opportunities of collaboration like we have here. So thank you, and we're very excited to talk about what we learned in this engagement.
Terrific. So the goal for tonight is to review the aspects of our IT department audit. And as Carrie explained well, we interviewed every single person in the department. We reviewed a lot of documentation, the job descriptions, the number and types of devices. We worked with the staff to identify other comparable organizations for benchmarking purposes, because you can always learn a lot from that. And we also came up with some estimated budget numbers based on our analysis. As I think both Javier and Carrie mentioned, with COVID, there has been a dramatic shift in the amount of and use of technology in districts. Maine was the first state to go one-to-one, so you guys had a big head start on the rest of the nation. But with the advent of COVID, that meant one-to-one at your elementary schools, not just your middle and high schools. Plus, technology became the primary delivery mechanism through which education has been delivered, which is a big change, but also presents an exciting opportunity to better leverage technology, not only now, but when we go back hopefully to in-person in the fall. So when we looked at other districts, some of the things that we look for in terms of benchmarking, one, because there's such technology is such an important strategic asset in educating students, and research has shown that used in a targeted way, it improves student engagement, it improves academic outcomes, it improves efficiency. When we look at redesigning the department, it's important that the name of each unit and the investment in your staff really reflect a clear vision on how you're going to use technology as a strategic asset to improve outcomes and improve efficiency. In some of the areas, one that we looked at was Arlington, Virginia, and Arlington, Massachusetts. Both of these places, a lot of Arlingtons, they have personalized learning coaches who share instructional strategies on how to use technology to better tailor and customize education for students. And when we looked at the different benchmark districts, all of them did have a central office instructional coordinator or coach that would help define the vision of instructional technology and use of instructional technology in the district, and would then work to build capacity to each individual school. So that was both defining the vision and then having a clear plan for building capacity at the districts to effectuate that vision was one of the big best practices. We also, given the importance to protect student data and all of our data and all the hacking that's going on around the world, it's important to have a specific role assigned to manage security for the department and comply with the best practices with the National Institute of Technology. And they created a cyber security framework that identified best practices in how to prevent, detect, and respond to cyber attacks. So if you look at, there was a 2016 survey that was done that showed 70% of respondents identified that the NIST framework was a important security best practice. So you have right now your network folks do that, but we felt it was important to even beef up that role even more and have potentially some additional training. Other benchmark districts on their website had the names and faces of their IT support staff. It really humanized those folks, and the contact information was clearly available on the website. The IT departments, all of them actually had an administrative support position. Portland currently does not have an administrative support person in their IT department. And this is just an important function because there's a lot of paperwork and filing, e-filing, and a lot of need for administrative work that right now the higher level staff are doing. You want to push down the lower skilled level task to the least expensive person on your payroll to do. It will save you money in the long term, and that's an important role that other districts have identified, all of the other benchmark districts. Also, in order to continue making sure that you leverage your IT staff as well as you can, it's important to have really strong self-help instructional materials on your website for educators, students, and families. You want to reduce those tier 1 calls as much as you can because that's a cost to the district. And the more you can have self-help, the less burden you're going to place on your tier 1 staff. You have some great resources. What we saw when we looked at other districts is even like they had videos and tutorials and very extensive tier 1 support materials. Also, this is an important area in terms of the way you structure your organization, and Phil's going to talk about this more later. We feel that the technology coaches and support personnel should be centrally hired, supervised, and trained. What this does is it allows a consistent high-level quality of support. Right now, some of your instructional technology support folks report up to the principal, and the principals love this because it's important. They like having control of all the resources in their school, but sometimes they have different priorities. And
Nona, sorry to interrupt. Would you be able to advance the presentation to perhaps slide 8 that shows the current org chart? This way we could really make it clear in regard to some of the shifts we're proposing.
This one?
Yeah, definitely. So now when you talk about the current state of things and some of the shifts we're recommending and some of the opportunities we've identified, you currently have what I would characterize as a very strong bread and butter IT shop, right? Where traditional IT services such as network, right, system support and system administration, very strong. And you work with the city to provide for some of your networking services. And the team does a great job of that currently. You also have a data leader who supports the student information system and provides stakeholders in your system with appropriate transactional data from the student information system. The pandemic has really catalyzed a shift where technology issuance for students is becoming the price of admission for education. Every student now has a computing device, and the technology is basically becoming commodified, and it is a consumable. So that's a huge lift for districts to do, and kudos that you've already done that. You figured out how to put technology in every student's hand. Now the next phase of maturity, as Nona's proposing, is really focusing on how students are using those consumable resources and ensuring that your district's instructional vision, the district's focus on equity, comes into strong intersection with its investments in technology, and that there are deliberate supports, specifically when Nona's talking about having an instructional technology coordinator who's scanning the marketplace constantly, identifying new impactful digital learning opportunities for students, whether it be a platform like Dreambox that's an adaptive math platform, whether it's a resource for teaching and learning like Nearpod, which allows for dynamic multimedia presentations and formative assessments, right? You need someone formally accountable leading that work in that area, ensuring students with fidelity across every classroom are getting those opportunities. And then you want to staff that person with a team of technology instructional specialists, I believe we're calling it, who can work on taking defined competencies that are defined in collaboration between your digital learning leader and your current academics leader, takes those competencies and creates a tactical plan with a menu of specifically enumerated courses, learning objectives that every teacher would ideally acquire so that they could be successful in this digital learning environment. And then we're proposing 3 technology integration specialists who are out there in the schools supporting teachers, because effective teaching and learning starts with the teacher. Higher student outcomes start with very well-prepared teachers. So that's some of what Nona was talking about. And I apologize, maybe Nona, if I skipped ahead a little bit, but I think the graph was very clear in showing that in the current level of maturity of the organization on slide 8, where we have building technology coordinators who are stipended. These are teachers who report to a principal, right? And they have additional duties placed upon them for the IT department. It's tough to march to the drum of 2 basically supervisors. So we're saying, let's provide resources that create the conditions for focus on this work. And Nona, I don't know if you want to add anything before we go to the catalog of services.
Well, I think we're going to go through the benchmarking first and then go into the catalog.
Perfect.
Okay. So that was our last point on the benchmarking, is just that the tech coaches report into a central person that is very technical, that understand and knows both from an instructional technology point of view and then also on the technical side, just to ensure a standard level of quality, and that those resources truly get used for supporting the technology. So when we looked at the benchmarking, we looked at 5 districts, and the way that we chose the other districts, we had criteria. One is just the size. You want a district that has a similar number of students and users of the computer, a similar number of schools. Also, the level of need of the student population in terms of poverty, and also resettlement. And the reason resettlement data are important is that the families that come in that don't speak English and may not have used computers in the past have a higher level of need, which puts greater demand both on the IT department as well as the multilingual department as well. And there's needs for cultural responsiveness, technology training, translation. There's a greater level of need for those populations. And then we also looked at some higher resource districts. And the reason we did this is we wanted to see for districts that had potentially more investment in technology because they had greater level of resources, did they invest more in their tech? And this would really clarify the impact of the digital divide. So we'll show you the range of districts that we looked at. Any questions just before? I know this is good instructional practice is more collaborative with the discussion. So if you have any questions, before we go in, we can take those as well.
Great. Thank you, Nona. Jeff or Yusuf, do you have any questions at this time?
Thank you, Nona. You said we need administrative support, and that will save us money. We need something that will help us save money. So can you talk about a little bit?
Yeah, because it's really impacting the level of service, because right now you have your techs doing a lot of, and everyone in the department doing lower level tasks, answering phones. There's a lot of procurement of devices. There's so anytime that you have someone that you're paying more money to do lower level skills, you're not really maximizing your dollars. So that's how I would describe it.
Thank you.
I have a question. So over the years, due to budget constraints, we've reduced, and I did not know whether or not you looked at, previous org charts of what we've had, because we have done over the years disservice, to several departments, but we had to because of shortfalls of money. And I believe at one time we had a pretty robust IT department, and some of the positions you're mentioning may have been reduced. So I'm wondering if you looked at org charts previously, because we were at one time set up very well, but obviously not to the level probably that you're talking about. But over the years, because of budget cuts, we went to areas like the administrative probably to reduce costs. So I'm just wondering if you looked at any kind of older org charts of what we used to look like.
We did, and you did have more appropriately staffed department in the past.
Okay. And some of the positions that you're mentioning of bringing back are positions we had in the past, and now we're kind of facing the repercussions of losing those positions in some ways.
That's exactly right.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you.
We have a lot more, but I just wanted to give you a chance if you had any burning issues, just 'cause I don't just like talk at you for half an hour.
Thank you. Yeah, it's good to pause. Thank you.
Right? Just a pause button. And just feel free to jump in if you have any questions. So we love doing this work. It's very meaningful to us. So trying to put you guys in a place that's not going to block the text here. So these are the districts we looked at. So Lewiston is obviously one of the other largest districts in Maine. They're not a resettlement district, but they are a similar size of enrollment. They do have a greater level of students below the poverty line than you do. We have 2 Arlington districts. These were referenced more because they're pretty well-resourced districts. And so we'd share with you some of the best practices. We're going to share with you their staffing. David Douglas in Portland is a resettlement district, a little bit larger than Portland. And Bowling Green is another resettlement district. And these were recommended to us. We spoke to a professor at the University of Vermont who actually, for some reason, has the only database of resettlement data. We were doing research, resettlement districts. The federal government, for some reason, took down the number of resettlement allocated positions. And luckily, I saw his name on a report and I called him up and he was willing to share the data with us. And then he also recommended he had gone out and visited many of these districts, which ones we should look at, that he felt like we're doing a good job serving those populations. And that's how we ended up with Bowling Green on this list. So overall, the methodology was looking at a cluster of different districts. We looked at similar size resettlement districts and then those that had more economic resources to identify best practices if folks had more money to invest in technology. So now we're going to get to the good stuff. This just shows you some of the charts we were looking at. So this just shows you the district name, the city. So we looked at mainly the small city is the kind of the density level that we looked at across a range of states, similar numbers of teachers. Sorry, this is jumping around here. Back up. For some reason, it's not going up. There we go. The enrollment is pretty similar, except for David Douglas is a little bit bigger, but they were a resettlement district, and just a range of need. So this is the coolest chart. So we basically were able to speak, if it had an asterisk, we spoke to them on the phone. And then some districts, no matter how much we tried, I know a lot of IT departments are overwhelmed right now with COVID, but they just didn't have time to call us back or connect with us. Let me move you guys up here. Move you to the side now. So what you can see here, I'll show you each of the columns. So this is the tech leader. You see Portland is in the row at the top. So everyone obviously had a tech leader, and then some had more than one person. They had assistant director at a very high level. This was an important one. The techs are the break fix folks. So these are the ones that will fix your computer, replace your computer, swap it out. Those are you call them computer technicians in your district. And you can see the numbers here. They vary, and Phil has done a detailed analysis that he will present to you. We looked at the Gartner staffing ratios and really came up with a zero-based budgeting way of identifying how many you need based on exactly what type of devices and how many you need to support. These are your network folks, which are pretty much in line. And these are standard for every district of this size. You need someone to maintain your servers, set up your firewall, set up Active Directory. So these are very kind of like a fixed number of folks you need in that role. The application folks vary, and the reason I think we don't have them in some of the districts, these are people who support, Munis. It depends on if it's a city function or a school function. This is your student information system, your LMS. These are your application folks. Often bigger districts hire people. Their people actually code new applications. You actually had one of your guys, when you distributed the devices, came up with an inventory tracking and distribution when you had that big influx of devices. So they do some program development. And there's data folks as well. This would be Jamie's role. This is a huge role right now. The districts that have a lot of resources will create data dashboards and referral to intervention dashboards that gather all sorts of data on which students are not succeeding and why and all the different data. These are the folks that oftentimes are in charge of ensuring that the vendors that you work with to provide applications protect student data, and you have contracts with each of them. That's a big, big job. We have to work with legal and the vendors. So this is all your state and federal reporting. Sometimes in some districts, research and evaluation is in this group as well. So you can see you're okay here. There is a lot of work right now with the data privacy, and sometimes different districts put that in the academic area. One of the glaring holes we saw here, this where the zero is this digital learning coach, and as you had mentioned, that was a role I believe in the past for your district, and that's a big miss right now. especially with the prevalence of technology used for instructional purposes, like you really need someone at the district level to help coordinate this and also build capacity at the other schools. And you can see that Lewiston has 3 people, in this role at the central office, and that work in the schools. Everyone else had an administrative assistant, except for this person Lewiston had 0.5, Bowling Green is the only other one that did not have an administrative assistant. And then there was project management role. Sorry, that's the special projects coordinator at Lewiston. And then some districts have 2 people assigned here in David Douglas just to work with the resettlement families that had higher needs and help those families. So we did it, just interviewed them, and these are the positions. And then I'm going to turn it over to Phil, who's going to talk about the implications of what we looked at and how we came up with a new organizational structure and different recommendations based on that benchmarking data.
Yep, perfect. So Nona, do you want to go to slide 9? And we've shown the current organizational structure. Perfect. So as I was saying earlier, you have really great strength when it comes to traditional IT functions, from network support to data systems administration, to your service desk, the people that help repair broken laptops and ensure that students get new laptops. The next level of maturation really is focusing on in kind of 3 areas. The first is, as Nona described, having a deliberate plan to define how the technology is used to accelerate your instructional vision and the district's strategic work, right? So that's a really big lift that's going to take multiple years. The second place you may want to look to invest some resources is in, as I talked about earlier, with the technology really becoming, commodified and blending into the background, and you now have ubiquitous technology access throughout the district for all students and teachers. It's the price of admission to an education. So, for example, what I found years ago when I started doing one-to-ones was what used to be acceptable as a 2-day turnaround because there was for example, computer broken in the computer lab, or a student had a laptop on a laptop cart that wasn't functioning, and you could say, okay, we're going to fix this in 2 days, use the pen and paper materials teacher, everything will be fine. Now requires you to have virtually instantaneous resolution times so that students have no barrier whatsoever to continuing to access the learning environment. So that second area of resources you may want to explore is an additional technical support so that there is instantaneous resolution. And instantaneous resolution doesn't even have to mean that they fix, for example, a technology asset. It could be coming up with a strategic program of break replace instead of break fix. But that requires some investment of resources at the point of service in the schools to make sure that everyone has what they need to keep going. And then finally, the third area, as you go further into this journey is, and I found this over the years, with more and more technology issuance, you basically end up with more and more artifacts and evidence of student learning. So the question for the district team, the core of the work is, how are we using this evidence to better tailor our supports and service to the students? So that third area is thinking about some of Jamie's function and the data and analytics over time in terms of how are we going to now take this data and turn it into actionable information every day in the classroom, whether it be virtual or on premises. So Nona, do you maybe want to go to the next slide? So we basically tried to summarize what you're currently doing, the services you're currently offering, and we tried to overlay basically the new service areas with measures that you could basically use to track your progress. So we talked about the technical leadership. That's very solid. Your district does an amazing job. We talked about the opportunity to mature in the instructional leadership realm as you go further and further along in your digital journey and intersect it with equity. So all students are provided with opportunities throughout the district that are implemented with fidelity by teachers who are well equipped to be successful in delivering those experiences. More than ever, your teams are going to have to work together to bring a new kind of experience to students in classrooms, whether they be on-premise or off-premise. So project management is something that, as Nona and I first started working together years ago, we found is incredibly important, just breaking down barriers and breaking down silos so that the instructional leadership is aligned with the academic leadership, is aligned with the technology leadership. I like to call it the three-legged stool, which is really where the core of your district activities that drive student service is going to be, between the people that design the teaching and learning, the academics folks, the people that make sure it's delivered with fidelity, whether it's your chief of schools or your building principals, and the resources that go into making those experiences impactful, which are now your technologists, your technology team delivering those resources. So the project management is where that special stew comes together. And obviously that has to be supported by a high quality network with ubiquitous data access. So, and I think your team does a phenomenal job. Jay Kerry on your team is wonderful, and he has such a great handle on everything when I ask him a question on anything. So I think they're doing a great job of that. And you want to keep your focus on that technical support piece, where a student can get a resolution to anything instantly. And that work is going to really revolve around traditional IT service model and IT service desk principles, where you're going to define a service level agreement, which is basically your commitment to your students and teachers, where there's a clearly communicated expectation with regard to if a teacher smartboard is out, it may take, for example, a week to repair. If a student laptop is out, there's a near instantaneous resolution because they may go to the media center and have maybe 2% of laptop over allocation at the site that instantly replaces that student's broken device. And then they log in if it's a Chromebook and they resume working. And you're going to have service level objectives, which are basically your targets for how often you meet that commitment to your students and teachers when you serve them. And if we go to the next slide.
I just want to add one thing. The reason we color coded this is the orange is where there's a lower level of staffing relative to the benchmark districts.
Yes, and I apologize that the orange represents your opportunities to continue your maturity along this journey. So did we go to the next slide, Nona? Perfect. So the instructional support is, again, I can't emphasize enough how much in all of my years of working on different digital learning initiatives, and in Broward with over 275,000 students, we're basically one-to-one in the wake of the pandemic. And we've done a number of things. We support students on a number of fronts, ranging from delivering meals to we've spun up a virtual tutoring center that students 6 days a week can dial into and just drop in for homework support, academic support. What I found is that instructional support is the key lever you need to pull to make sure that your teachers, who drive so much value in the lives of your students, your teachers have to be prepared to be successful in this environment. And that takes some deliberate planning and investment of resources. So when we talk about a coordinator who designs the supports that need to be present, that's important. And then you need a team of instructional technology people, technology integration specialists, we're calling them, who are out coaching, delivering exemplar lessons so that teachers can, see what this looks like in practice. And they're out there providing feedback as they provide peer-to-peer observations or lesson observations for teachers and coaching them to get better, basically, with regular feedback. And finally, we've talked a little bit about the student data and assessment and how important that is, and district application support, which your district does very phenomenally well. And Jamie's overwhelmed, and hopefully staffing up in some of these other areas takes some of this pressure off of her. There's also an opportunity for Portland to think about how we as an educational institution are providing opportunities for students to work in this environment and apply their talents and ideas, and sometimes make a mistake, but receive guidance and feedback. So one thing that's very common throughout the nation are these technology apprenticeship programs. I had started one years ago in Greenwich with Nona. I have some in Broward today with student tech teams. Offering these job-embedded learning opportunities for students is another way of providing meaningful support for the acquisition of 21st century skills for students. So that's something we also would strongly encourage you to think about and perhaps be deliberate in providing support for. Do you want me to speak through this note, or do you want to?
Sure. So the results, our overall findings and recommendations were, first of all, with your full one-to-one deployment and in the new normal, we do feel you're understaffed in your technology department, both based on national standards and benchmarking data. We think that we would recommend hiring 7 new staff and phase it in, 3 FTEs in 2021 and 4 FTEs in 2022 if you want to provide that full catalog of IT service offerings. And we're going to walk you through exactly how we came up with those numbers shortly. We feel that right now the impact of the IT staff understaffing may not be fully apparent. We weren't able to meet with teachers, but right now your teachers are providing Tier 1 support for students and families. And this is they have so much on their plates already. Asking them to be Tier 1 IT support is really a big lift. You're gonna have teacher burnout. That they're there to instruct. They're not there to fix devices. And what's been happening is that they will try and take the ticket information from the student, and then this is according to the perspective from the IT department, who we did speak to, and they won't get incomplete information, because obviously the teacher's trying to teach and write some information down about what's not working while they're trying to do a million other things, and then they don't have the right information on the ticket, and then there's more back and forth because they can't fix the device because they don't have the information, and it's just it's resulting in lost instructional time, and it's really kind of an unfair, in my opinion, a burden to put on your instructional staff. There's also a lot of undocumented time invested by the IT staff, the BTCs and school personnel. People do charge in their overtime as they need to, but there's still, I think, a lot of, my understanding is that there was a lot of time spent, especially with rolling out all the new devices, that perhaps wasn't always charged in. There's just a lot of undocumented time potentially, and going the extra mile by your IT staff. The lack of a technology integration professional learning support model, I think we've hit that several times, but we listed here the bullets that it's just important to identify those competencies in ed tech literacy, safety, and use, and do your professional learning needs assessment to understand where people need to improve their instructional technology skills to help students. You're going to want to have a technology integration, professional learning and support model beyond just the BTCs that you have right now. Right now, people I think are so understaffed. There's not always time to enter all the help desk tickets into the system. There's hall grabs that are happening, and we all know how it can happen. You just grab someone, hey, I see you coming by. Could you please help me fix this? And they don't, then they go to the next thing, and they don't always have time to log their tickets. So normally we would look at the customer satisfaction measures and the efficiency of the system. But right now I think there's so much understaffing, it's hard to really get a sense of how many tickets there are and, what the service level has been. So you do need, though, to at some points institute that robust help desk data so you can really understand, your level of customer satisfaction and make sure that you're responding to the instruction halting tickets, first, that there's a level of urgency and priority that are documented. So there's also right now it would benefit the district to formally adopt one of a framework such as NIST that would help you really make sure that you are really proactively assessing and ensuring that if there's a cyber attack that you're prepared. I think you guys heard SolarWinds have been hacked in the national press. It's just really important to stay on top of that. And you guys do an amazing job. It might be nice to just we recommended adding to the job description, getting a little additional training and adding that officially to the role in a little bit more defined way, given the latest hacking things that have been happening to our country. Also to develop more of a mature depreciation and funding cycle for your one-to-one devices. Right now, you've had a huge influx from the grant money of all sorts of new devices, and it's going to be important we did this, in Greenwich, and Phil can talk to this, but come up with a depreciation cycle and just decide going forward at what point you're going to start replacing. And it's just important to build that potentially, ideally, into your capital budget, not your operating budget, if you can. And then we already hit the last point about right now you have decentralized school integration specialists that report to the principals as teachers, and you're not going to get a consistent level of training or support or standard setting across the district when you have all those different bosses, for those folks. So we do think that if you really want to prioritize their effort, they would report up to some central person, or at least have a matrix structure where their skills are defined by the central person and they can supervise the application of those skills, but the principal would obviously have input into their performance evaluation as a customer. Anything else you wanted to add, Bill?
No, and I do want to be respectful of time because I know this was a lot to unpack, but I think this is a good juncture to ask for any questions or clarifying questions that are needed here.
Thank you. Jeff or Yusuf?
I just have one question, and you'll forgive my ignorance on a lot of this within the IT world. But I do appreciate and understand the deficiency that the school has. In the last slide, you talked about the depreciation cycle of the devices, and we build it into the budget on the capital side for the future. Did you gauge any of the school districts that we talked about in previous slides on what that expense, how that adjusted their budget?
Phil, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, no, actually, we didn't look at that specific question on the benchmark districts, but I will say from just my experience, as CIO of 3 districts, it's a common practice in K-12 to capitalize your student laptop program. We do it in Broward. Miami-Dade, that's 20 miles down the road from me. Very good friends with the CIO there. They're the 4th largest school district in North America. They also build their expense into the capital program. What the work really entails is you want to work with your manufacturer partner and get a reliable estimate for how long you truly think these devices will last. So for example, in the K-12 space, Chromebooks tend to run for about 2 years, depending on the price point, but particularly when you're at that about $350 price point, they go for about 2 years. iPads go for 5 years, and Apple stands very proudly behind that. Mac laptops go for about 5 years. Sometimes you can run them for 7 years, depending on the particular model. So then you just build into your budgets the value that's depleted from that age of inventory every year. And most districts, especially given the low interest rates we've had since the crash of 2008, just go out and bond and borrow and put it in the capital program.
So you've recognized that 2% above is the norm?
I'm sorry?
I think you mentioned something about 2% above the norm of what you would have as surplus.
Oh, yeah. So that's a common practice. And this was a shift that was made very commonly in K-12 maybe 5 years ago. I like to think we were kind of at the head of that curve, Nona and I in Greenwich. But a lot of school district IT organizations were organized as traditional, what we call break-fix organizations. As a laptop broke, they would keep a certain parts inventory, whether it be motherboards, keyboards, screens. Districts would sometimes send people to like literal manufacturer training academies to get certified with screen replacement, et cetera, and they would replace that asset. As the cost of consumable K-12 technologies has come down, there's kind of been an intersection with the labor price per ticket for a repair, such that it's more cost effective in many cases to just buy an additional reserve of, let's say you buy 100 laptops for kids. What you tend to find is, and Nona and I have done a study on this, you tend to find that elementary kids lose about 3% of the devices. Middle school kids can lose as much as 8% of the devices. One year we lost 8% of devices in a middle school, and high school kids will lose no more than 4% of the devices. So then it just becomes math to triangulate against your labor costs to support them. How much of a modicum of extra devices do you want to buy to just swap them in? Great question, by the way. Yeah. It's, we get math practice in the IT world quite a bit.
Thank you, Jeff. Yusuf, do you have any questions at this time?
I do have one question about having a student work in the technology field and offering jobs. How is that going to be balanced out with their instructional time?
Oh, that's a great question. So what I have done is remember, a lot of high schools across America have some type of service hours requirement. Many high schools have an internship, or many school boards actually have a policy that requires an internship. So in most cases, these programs just provide hours that are credited toward those existing board requirements. And the student fulfills them just as they would any other traditional internship, whether it be during a free period, they can work with the school technology team. In many cases, it becomes an after-school engagement where they stay for 2 hours and may help to repair certain assets, or it might be an early morning once a week that they come in and put some hours in. But that's generally what it looks like. It's a traditional internship opportunity that a student would use to satisfy in-service credits.
And at the elementary level, you can do this just as students have roles to wipe off the board or clean the lockers. They can have an IT specialist. The students at elementary love being the IT expert, and they oftentimes train the teachers on how to find something. So it's a great role to have at elementary and middle school. The kids love that role.
You all set, Yusuf?
Also, one more time.
Okay, sure, go ahead.
About undocumented time and stuff going overtime. Is it in this pandemic period, or?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Undocumented time for the staff going overtime. It's spending a lot of hours on technology. Is it in pandemic period time, or is just overall in?
It was the pandemic period requirements of a huge influx of devices, all new devices in every grade, all at once. That was the big lift since COVID.
Thank you.
So I have a couple questions. So when I started on the board, and I think Nona made reference to this, we were working through the MLTI, the one-on-one computing, and the district made a commitment at that time to purchase Apple products, and we got pricing, and I know the state used to, I'm not sure if they still do, I assume they do, pricing with various manufacturers. And we had made a commitment at that time to keep Apple. With our last superintendent prior to Javier joining us, because we wanted to get to one-on-one computing, we went to, and I know they serve a purpose, but the paperweight's a little bit. The board was not thrilled about making the segue from Apple over to Chromebooks. I have 2 girls now that are out of high school, but I know that they didn't use them because it was very limited in function. But we also, cost-wise, wanted every student as much as possible to have a device. So I'm just wondering your thoughts on that, because one of the reasons that we started moving away from Apple II was that when you talked about cracked screens and repairs and things of that nature, that played into the whole conversation. But we all know Apple lasts a lot longer, and viruses and so on and so forth aren't as prevalent. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
I'll let Phil take that. He has a lot to say about that, but it's a great question.
We could be here all night if we get into this.
We've debated this so many times, and
so I would offer a couple of kind of starting considerations for this quick discussion. One is your students will most likely encounter all of these platforms in the workforces that they go into in the future. So, Chromebooks are very common in the enterprise and adult world of work. Macs are very common. Windows PCs are very common. So I preface my thoughts against the idea that there's really no wrong choice. There's really what is just the right choice for your community, given its priorities, its considerations, and its focus at the time. So what I've found in the past is that, and Nona's done this with me, and granted, I've done this in other districts, when you model out the useful life of, for example, a $200 or $250 Chromebook against a now $300, which you can get them for about $340 or $379, a $379 iPad, for example. Over the long term, there's not that great a difference in terms of the savings of the Chromebooks, which have a lower price point. The value proposition is a little bit more compelling when you compare the Chromebooks against, for example, an $899. That's what Apple's going to quote you for K-12 pricing for a MacBook Air, their lowest model, $899. You're kind of winning out better in favor of the Chromebooks just in terms of overall total cost of ownership over the useful life of the devices. And obviously, a 7-year MacBook that you'll have to buy a couple of iterations of a Chromebook to keep up with it, but you'll still save some money, is what I would offer from my experience. But again, it's really going to come down to your priorities locally. Go ahead, Nona.
I was going to say that, but you have to look at your portfolio of devices strategically. So when you'd use the MacBook is when you'd have either the the carts for the classroom carts, because for certain like music, for garage, there's certain apps that you really do need the Apple for. So it's like graphic design, GarageBand.
To reverberate that, we generally buy low-cost Windows devices in Broward. We spend, it's 275,000 students, so we have a large technology purchase program, and we have to maximize our dollars. So we spend approximately no more than $449 per student device, and we buy Windows devices. But to Nona's point, yearbook committees at schools, video clubs, those are all school-based structures that inevitably do put in some orders for higher capability MacBook equipment, whether it be MacBook Pros, iMacs, et cetera. So you may end up with multiple distribution strategies, like your one-to-one may be all Chromebook. You may have some specials that you buy some Macs for here and there, a cart model. You may, for example, in Broward, we buy iPads for our pre-K program for 2 reasons. One, because of the availability of educational software that is developmentally appropriate for students at that age 1. But then 2, the iPads have exceptional accessibility options, which are really important for that population of learners, particularly as they're emerging in their developmental abilities. So it's really like you're going to take a fine-tooth magnifying glass to the situation and have a multiple device strategy is kind of where you may end up.
So I guess what I was getting to with that too, I mean, I'm a big Apple fan, but of the repairs. And a gentleman that's here locally, that was our former IT director, works for Apple. And I know when Javier first joined us, I brought in some of them because I worked with them down in Pennsylvania. I think it was at a national school board conference. And one of them ended up happening to be a brother of one of our employees. So it was really the connections. But anyway, going with that, they talked about, all the different programs they have so that Apple can get into. And I guess for me, it was always important to have the one-on-one computing, but at the same time, I don't know. I'm not a big fan of the Chromebooks, but so I was interested in hearing your thoughts on that. And then the insurance, and I'm not sure if we're still doing it this way. And I'm wondering if you had any back along, we would have parents pay for insurance. They had to sign a form and send in a check, and if that gave them coverage, and if it wasn't used. And it was part of a school fund at the school based, then the school, used those funds. So I'm not sure where that stands these days, but we used to have a program like that. And I don't know if sorry, go ahead, Javier.
We now purchase the insurance centrally instead of asking parents to do it.
Okay, from MSMA, that program, something like that?
I don't recall.
Okay. And then, Javier, when Yusuf brought up the question around internships, I'm assuming, do we still have the cybersecurity program at Paths?
We do.
Okay. I was just wondering too, while we would love to ramp up and you have the 4-year plan, I'm wondering too, if it wouldn't be a good opportunity to fill some of those gaps should the students want to get that experience and be around, if that wouldn't be another avenue that, potentially we could work into where we, finances for everybody. I know it's very challenging. You have to make a commitment to this, but I thought that was another. And then I know USM has a very strong cybersecurity program as well. So I just think, do you find partnerships like that in your work, Phil? Or
truthfully, no, and because we don't want to apply constructs of the adult world of work to students. You can't fire students when they make mistakes. I've always.
So I meant for the experience, not necessarily for.
Yeah, I don't look to students for staff augmentation per se. I sincerely try to provide mentorship and development opportunities for the students, as opposed to if I have an office or business need, we go out and hire for that.
No, I was thinking not supplementing for staff-wise, but also letting them gain the experience. That's what I was thinking more so. Not to say we're not going to hire, this. We're going to fill it with two students.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, but so to your point, for that educational purpose, the challenge is always, it's somewhat nuanced in that you want to be careful what resources you're making available to students. So you have to make sure students don't have access to data on other students, for example. They can't access student records. They have proper permissions to access certain systems. They can't touch the SIS, et cetera. But it is a very good opportunity for students to, become immersed in some of the topics like cybersecurity, especially on the network side, as it relates to securing ports of different systems, printers, appliances, and teaching them that type of thing. But you just have to be careful not to give them access to live data or live email communications from other people.
I know I was getting a little off topic there, but some of this stuff really excites me. When I went to that Apple class at the National School Board Conference, it was really, really exciting. When they
we love talking about this stuff. We'll be here all day.
The coding sucked me right in. I was like, I can write a code for a video game.
Awesome.
So anyway, I don't want to hold up because it is getting late, so I'll let you keep going. Thank you.
So did you want to talk through the new org chart, Phil? You want me to talk through the new org chart?
No. If you maybe want to just make some quick remarks, and then I know we probably want to give it back to Mr. Botana.
Right. We did have data behind this, but what we're recommending is that you have, so within reporting up through the Chief Academic Officer and the Director of Curriculum Assessment Instruction was where we would locate your Technology Instructional Coordinator, and they would be responsible for 3 technology instructional specialists that would build capacity in the schools. You could still keep your BTCs that they work around 2 to 4 hours a week, so you have someone on site at the schools all the time. We found these advisory committees to work very well, one on data governance and one on technology, so that if you're buying a new LMS, you have if you're doing your data dashboard and you need someone to decide what these data elements are, it has representatives that would all be impacted by how you categorize that data element or the impact of the new system. We had a daily steering committee, this one-to-one, where we had a project manager, we had our communications person, we had a principal from every level, grade band level, elementary, middle, high, and we became really close, and it worked really well, and it was seamless to make sure that anytime we made a major decision, anyone that was impacted by that decision had a say in how that would be rolled out. This was my role in Greenwich, so I found it very valuable, but I was the one who kind of coordinated all these advisory committees and invited people. We had people apply for them. They were stipended. I developed the agendas with Phil. We facilitated them. We sent out notes. We did all the major procurements through those committees. We also did handle the data privacy. We tried to get rid of that. It's a lot of work. Phil's actually an attorney, but trying to negotiate each data privacy contract with vendors that some of them have free software and they don't want to even talk to you. They're like, you're getting my software free. I'm not going to negotiate with you. And what I agreed to notify you in case there's a data breach. But so that was like a lot of work. And I really feel for Jamie, because like if she's doing all that data privacy, those contracts, like it's going to be hard, and state and federal reporting and the data dashboard, it's a lot. But if you wanted to, we also, applied for many grants, and we had a lot of procurements. So I helped with a lot of that. And then having the executive assistant is important as well. And then the technicians, Phil's going to just show you, we did zero-based budgeting in terms of how many techs you need based on Gardner. So we're just going to quickly show you how we came up with these numbers. We spent a lot of time thinking about this. We would never recommend spending this much additional money without a lot of justification and thinking. We're very careful about spending resources. So here's the benchmarking that we did. I don't know if you can see this. This is for the tech role. Do you want to do, Phil, or you want me to do this one? How do you want to do this?
I'll just do it quickly. So for the sake of time, we built this whole proposal off of industry standard benchmarks. So for example, Gartner, very popular technology research consulting service, says that organizations, depending on their priority, should allocate between 3 and 6% of their revenue to the IT function. The education vertical, if you look at the whole education vertical, for example, in 2018, they allocated 4.1%. If you take US K-12 out of that 4.1% and exclude higher education, universities, et cetera, the measure comes down a little bit. So basically, this whole presentation was built in consideration of the body of research out there on the resource allocation, generally for technology and specifically within education. And for the technician role, when we recommend 7 technicians total, we're doing that based on industry standard technology support benchmarks. Whereas you see here in the chart, Gartner, Deloitte, a number of other research services recommend, and there's pretty broad consensus on this, about 1 FTE for every 200 MacBooks that you're managing, 1 FTE for every 500 Windows devices, 1 FTE for every 1,000 iPads or Android tablets, and 1 FTE for every 2,000 Chromebooks. So it becomes an exercise of 5th grade math at that point to then look at the portfolio of assets that you're managing and start building your service model based on commonly accepted industry standard ratios for support.
And this was, we also looked at other measures. This is the one that we think is the best one to use, but we also looked at the comparable district benchmarks levels. They had 1 tech for every 2.4 schools. So if you had that, you would have 7 techs as well. So we triangulated on, different levels. If you want to we also looked at high service levels. So we were fortunate at Greenwich to have 1 full-time tech at every school. Originally, those people were like the AV people, but we had we had like a plethora of riches there, and it was great. And they were busy. It wasn't that they were not busy either, but it really felt, we felt like it allowed. Go ahead.
Do you have any schools with 3 kids?
Do we have what?
No, we did not.
Schools with 3 kids?
No, we did not.
So you'd have to combine. That would be, you'd probably take those out of the analysis in that case, but yeah. So, and then for the technology integration specialist, this one we did zero-based budgeting in terms of how they would spend their time. So the goal was that every staff person would get 40 hours of initial one-to-one training. And then you'd have a maintenance amount of 15 hours per year to stay abreast of instructional technology. And then basically we just multiplied the 15 hours per year per staff by 600 staff teachers that you have, and we came up with 9,000 total hours. And then we said you'd spend 5% of that doing like 20-person classes, 70% doing working with like grade level or team meetings, and 25% would be one-to-one coaching. And so we just added prep in, and we backed out the number of hours you would for each person you would need, and came out with the full-time coordinator and the 3 full-time specialists. And at Greenwich, we actually had we repurposed our library media specialists to be the instructional technology specialists. So they only did the library reading for grades K to 2. Those were like still standard library, but grades 3 to 5 and up, they basically just became coaches, and they were the ones that became our digital integration specialists. So that was a high service level. And then we just showed, what you have versus like what the comparable benchmark schools had. So the other part was we recommended the project manager. If you're going to have a lot of procurements and advisory committees and governance, you're going to make an investment in that. We recommended a project manager because that's someone who can work across the boundaries pretty well. It's hard to sometimes, as you know, to do projects and break out of your silo. It's good to have a role that can cross over those silos. We talked about the student classroom technology roles and the admin. And then these are the costs. We basically did a back of the envelope calculations. We just made some estimates here. So we just assumed the impact on your budget would be an additional $720,000. And that would be comprised of your tech. The instructional side was $365,000, 3 of the tech integration specialists at a fully loaded rate with benefits at $80,000, a central office coordinator of $125,000. And then if you added 3 service techs at $55,000, plus this would just pay your network person who's taking on this additional role slightly more to get those certifications and have a little bit more on the line for that. And then the admin and the project manager would be a total of $720,000. And that's our last slide. So I'll put it back into the gallery mode so we can see each other.
And then, Nona, so first of all, thank you to both you, Nona, and Phil for your, for your smarts and the care that you took in sort of learning about where we are and what we're trying to do. So, I can't thank you guys enough for that. Carrie, for, sort of in a short time, understanding who we were and, helping them to get connected and contextualize. I think that's tremendously, it's hard, and I'm just in awe of everything that you've been able to do in that process. The reason that we brought this here is, as you know, we're trying to sort of bring a more serious vetting to the kinds of budget initiatives that we envision moving forward. And so, just like we had the focus session on the pre-K expansion at the board yesterday, the curriculum committee had a similar conversation to this around some of the curricular investments that we're looking to make, and decolonizing our curriculum, increasing our math and literacy supports and things along those lines. So this is at the operations committee, as the group that oversees the operations departments within the district. We thought it was important to bring this to you so that you understand. And as I said to Chair Figdor when we were sort of working on the strategy, I said, what I would like is minimally that when we bring these issues to the board on March 16th, that there will at least be 3 people in the room who will nod that they understand where this is coming from. Doesn't, commit you to voting for it, but, it is, you have a deeper understanding that what we're going to be able to do for the full board at the time that we're introducing the budget. So that's really the purpose in this. And I guess, as we sort of, transition out of this, I do, you mentioned, and I can't remember what slide it was, Nona, where you had sort of a phased implementation of this. So where can you pull that back up real quick just to give the board an idea of what that might look like? So, 720 is a hefty, price tag, and this will still be a hefty price tag, but, it's more likely that we will be thinking about it as a phased implementation as opposed to, everything all at once.
Right. So we had said 3 FTE starting next school year and then 4 the following year.
Yeah. And did you have like a sort of an idea around what would be the high leverage? What would you do with the first 3, and then what would you do with the next 4?
Feel free to jump in. I would do at least 2 techs. I would maybe split it down the middle, because I do believe that the instructional strategy is so important. I mean, definitely that full-time district coordinator and maybe you can give them a year's runway to plan, but ideally they're going to come in highly experienced and be able to, at least them plus 1 coach could start building capacity, in the district. I also don't want to see the techs, where they are with the level of being overburdened. So maybe 2 and 2. I don't know. Phil, what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely would prioritize the instructional or the technology coordinator most highly, so that there's a formally accountable owner for this work. Then I would think about either providing 1 or 2 technology integration specialists in year 1, so that they can start really turnkeying the work out to schools, getting teachers familiar and immersed in the lexicon of the technology and the different resources that are out there. And let's say if you did 1 technology integrator in year 1 plus the coordinator, then you might add 1 additional technology specialist that does tech support, so that there's a shot in the arm for the school-based support for the technology itself. So I would do, just to recap, I know I said a lot, the coordinator, the integrator, and then the technology specialist would be my recommendation.
You both alluded to the fact of the executive assistant could take on the paperwork, etc. Do you think that would be a focus as well? So that way it would remove, so those people that are doing paperwork could then, do you find that to be a priority, or is that so that would free up other people to do other things?
That's a great question.
I just didn't see that as one of the priorities for the.
That's a great question.
It's a great question, and I'm sorry to interrupt, Phil, but the reality is we have to prioritize what it is that we're bringing forward, and I think we will be weighing all of those things as we, it's like the recommendation is 7, it's not 3. And so, to do 3, there are some things that we're not going to be able to do. To do 7, we would be able to do all of that. So I think, that is, we're currently in the process of doing our prioritization around all of the different investments that we look to bring to the board. And so we will be doing that. Clearly, a secretary would be huge, and it would be a tremendous, add to the department. For the, right now, the techs are doing the help desk work, right? So there's somebody who also does the data that is also supporting the help desk. So they can't do full data or they can't do full tech because they're doing help desk support. And I think, you guys mentioned this, but I just want to sort of underscore it, is, we are in a situation where our frontline techs, our frontline help desk are our teachers. They're the ones that are doing the, let me see if I can figure it out, and if not, doing the help desk tickets. So, that is, that's like where all of these things start to fall apart, when you have people who have no real sort of specialization, leave alone time to do that work, having to do that work. So, clearly this is why I wanted to bring this to the committee today. This is, it's always been on our radar. It's much more on our radar as we, have stressed our staff to the max, and to, have, gigantic escalation of our device presence with, tremendous potential that we can either realize or just sort of let it wither away and have them become, I think Board Committee Chair Thompson referred to them as paperweights or, doorstops or something along those lines. So we can do that if we don't make those investments.
Thank you. I think, Javier, you got to exactly what I was asking Phil. So thank you for doing that. I appreciate it. And I know we have to weigh all of that. Yeah. And you do a very good job with that. I wasn't discounting that. So Jeff and Yusuf, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions, but I just have a quick comment. I just wanted to apologize to Nona, Philip, and Carrie for being new and addressing other questions pre-OIT. It kind of felt like you guys did yeoman's work in this presentation, and I felt like it was rushed based on time, and some of that has to do with us being new, asking questions about things that weren't necessarily relevant to your presentation. So, one, thank you, and two, I apologize.
There's no need. We're sit through so many board meetings, so I was doing other work. So just to be perfectly honest, I was not paying that much attention until I heard. I was waiting for Javier, so let's do the IT staffing. So I paid a little bit of attention, but I'm just being honest.
Your first year pass, second year, not so much. You get a first year pass.
We did have a pretty substantive agenda today, just a lot of things. We normally don't have this.
Don't forget we have to do the meeting minutes too before we sign off.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, thank you.
But again, thank you guys, Phil, Nona.
I didn't know if Yusuf had any questions. I'm sorry.
I just want to echo what Jeff said. Thank you so much. Guys are amazing, and this is really helpful to some sort of understand the basics, and thank you for all the work that went into preparing this presentation, and thank you.
Thank you. It's our pleasure. My only regret is that I didn't actually get to go up and do the interviews in person because I love Portland so much. Best food, so beautiful, great breweries. I've been on that green bus, that brewery bus, like done the bike ride. Like my husband and I went there for our 25th wedding anniversary. Our kids went to camp up there. So I just wish it was, I was able to come in person.
Well, we'll have to make an excuse for you to come back.
Right. Great.
Someday we'll be doing that again, Nona.
I want to thank you both as well. And there was a lot of great information here and a lot of great data and your expertise. We really greatly appreciate it. So thank you.
Your staff, you have a great department and a great district. And thank you for giving us this opportunity. We really enjoyed every minute of it.
Yeah, great superintendent, great team. You guys
you can't take him. You can't take him to Miami.
I don't know. Maybe one day, if you like sunshine.
No, we can't leave.
The funny thing is when Phil and I first started talking, a friend of mine from Chicago is the superintendent, and the deputy superintendent was my neighbor.
Marie.
So it's, so we have all of these, intricate web of.
Sorry, Phil. He's ours for a while.
He's doing great work there, so you can't come down yet.
We're very lucky. Okay.
No, you're a phenomenal team, phenomenal district. I can't tell you how much of a pleasure it's been speaking with Carrie and Jamie and Jay and Xavier, and it's just so. I wish students got to see how hard boards and cabinets and superintendents work on their behalf, because the commitment is very, very, very clear from working with your team. So it's humbling.
We all do it because we love them, right?
Yes.
Want them to succeed.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you, Carrie, as well. Appreciate your leadership.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Great evening. And everybody else, hang on for 1 sec.
Be well. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks again, guys.
Yes, I have to figure out now how to get out. Here we go. Exit.
Thanks, Nona.
Thank you.
So I was just looking at the meeting. That's why I wanted to pause on that, Javier, is because I am the only one that's still here from the meeting minutes. So I don't know whether it makes any sense to have Yusuf and Jeff vote on something they have no blessed clue about, but we can do it.
I don't, we've had this problem in every committee that we've been meeting with. So, people have been super loose about it. I don't think that there's a requirement that we approve the minutes. They're there. That is, you can review them and see if it actually reflects your recollection. I
did read them, so it looked perfect. Yeah. So thank you.
And we have Henry here recording us. So if somebody ever says like, that's not what happened, they'll always be able to go, let's go to the tape. So,
so we're okay with just without doing a full. Okay. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Anybody have anything else before we close? All right. Well, thank you all very much for your time. We went way over, but it was great information. I think that, very appreciative. Very appreciative.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, guys, and on to the next meeting.
Oh, geez.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, guys.